Hello, folks. Your guide through this Saturday the 16th. So, in the first part of this event, just go back on our page and scroll until you find that video. It shouldn't be buried very deep. But in the first video, I covered the first 6 of our 12 dolls. We went in chronological order, going from the earliest theoretical American girl that would have lived here at Clermont, who would have been a young girl from the Mohican tribe, all the way up through the Regency era. Who are the American Girls of Clermont, and what is this program all about? The American Girls of Clermont are a series of dolls that is an ongoing series that were created to help young girls and young children learn about the history of the local area through visual aids like dolls. Seamstress and has an amazing talent for designing dolls. Used as an inspiration point for these doll dresses in my first video, and I would like to have Adrienne on in a future video or dolls. So the program was launched in July of 2019. You can see some photos here from our first event. It was so much fun. At the end of the tour, we went back up to the visitor center and we had a tea party, and everyone was able to make a American Girl doll size t-shirt. Young lady brought her Totoro plushie, but luckily the t-shirt fit on Totoro just as well. So this is a really fun program. It's been quite successful. Unfortunately, things settle down, but for the meantime, we're doing it virtually. So, our first doll today is Alice Delafield Clarkson. She would have been 10 years old in 1859, and she's super exciting because she is actually the first Clermont girl who we have pictures of, photos of, as a young girl. To be the mother of Alice Delafield Clarkson Livingston, who we're going for. Alice was born in New York City. She would have spent her childhood down there. She's from a very good family. She marries Dr. Clarkson, and they start their family down in New York City. And then eventually they move upstate, up the Hudson Valley, to one of the properties that neighbors Clermont. Now, both Alice and her husband are Livingston's very distant Livingston cousins, as was common amongst the Livingston family, as you know. And she lived a very Victorian lifestyle. She would have been raised in around her rapidly. Now, she's also one of our Her dress is nice and poofy. It's very fun. And when we present this doll in real life, she is generally one of everyone's most favorite dolls out of the group because she is very cute and her dress is very poofy and fun and beautifully detailed if you ever get the chance to see this one in real life. And again, because we have a photo of her as a child, our seamstress Adrienne was able to really recreate the way that she looked as a little girl, which unfortunately with our dolls from our first program we kind of had to guess because at best we had paintings of these young girls done 15. Our next doll is Sarah Potts. She was 10 in 1875 and she's not a Livingston. She is a girl of Palatine descent living in Germantown. So, you might ask, why do we have this doll here who's not a Livingston? Well, Sarah would have been 4th or 5th generation Palatine. The Palatine Germans were the people who came over right after the Livingstons did, way back in the early 1700s, to work the land for the Livingstons. Now, there was a deal between Queen Anne and Robert Livingston, the first Robert Livingston, again going all the way back to 1710, where Robert Livingston said that if the Queen sent over people to work his property for him, he would send them back pine tar, which the British Navy used to seal their ships. Robert Livingston claimed that there was lots and lots of pine tar in the woods in Germantown, and the Queen said, oh, we need that. And the Queen also said, oh, we have these German immigrants that just kind of live in Hyde Park in London, and we don't know what to do with them. They were all pretty much middle-class furniture maker types, but they can work outside. It'll be great. Everybody wins. So the Palatines came across the ocean. They come to New York City. A lot of them pretty much abandoned ship when they got to Manhattan, but about 3,000 of them come up the river and they settle in what's now Germantown. Thus the name. The Germans formed a town here. However, there really wasn't any pitch pine here for them to make the sealant for the boats. And the Queen didn't send all of the supplies that she said she was going to send with the Palatines to help them settle and, build houses and things. So after one rough winter, they kind of renegotiated the contract. A lot of the German Palatines left at that point. Many of them went out to what's now Schoharie County and started a community called Palatine Bridge. And many of them went out to Pennsylvania and became what we now know as Pennsylvania Dutch. However, a good 1,000 or so of them stayed in Germantown, and over the years they built up a community. They bought land off of the Livingstons, and they created their own farms. Even so, many Palatines worked for the Livingston family, either on their grounds or in their house as servants. Sarah Potts here is not really a real person. She's made to represent a person from a certain time, from this community. The name Sarah Potts is actually really common in Germantown, Potts being one of the old Palatine names and Sarah being a very common first name in general. But Sarah is meant to represent the daughter of a Palatine family who works for the Livingstons. Her mother might work in the house, her father might work out in the fields. So although Sarah lives in her own house in town and does her own thing, her life and the lives of the Livingstons are very much interconnected. Someday, Sarah might actually grow up to work in the house as well. Now, we've moved on to 1882. This is Alice Delafield Livingston. Alice is, I'm sorry folks, Alice is the last matriarch of Clermont. If you've ever come to Clermont, you have heard about Alice before. She is the lady who eventually gives the house to the state of New York in the 1960s. And in 1882, she's 10 years old, and she's growing up right up the street from Clermont at one of the other Livingston family houses. Now, Alice was an interesting young lady. She was very artistic. She loved European culture. She loved traveling. We know that when she was young, she suffered from an illness and was actually sent to live with relatives, relatives out in Italy for at least a year or so. And while she was there, she really developed an appreciation of the culture. In fact, when she's all grown up, she and her husband travel to Italy for their honeymoon, and then when she has her own daughters, they move to Italy for 5 years to continue her daughter's education. Alice is another Livingston where we are very lucky to have actual photos of her as a child, which helped our seamstress create her lovely outfit. Like her mother, Alice has beautiful curls. Her dress is very beautiful and lacy in this beautiful white color. White dresses for children become very popular around this time, and it continues really into the early 20th century. In previous generations, children were dressed like mini adults. Whatever fabric was used to make their mother's dresses would be used to make their dresses. But when we get into the Victorian era, we start to see a difference between children and adults. They differentiate childhood as a specific point in your life, and that they decide that you are innocent and you don't have to work and you're not a mini adult. You're learning how life works. And so they dress you in white because it portrays how innocent you are. 1883 brings us Catherine Livingston Timpson. Now, Catherine is just a year younger than Alice, but their lives become strangely interconnected as they get older. So Catherine is the only surviving child of John Henry Livingston and his wife Catherine. Now, when Catherine was born, her mother apparently never recovered from childbirth and passed away soon after. Catherine was sent to live with her aunts in Philadelphia, and about a year or two later, her father, John Henry, sends for her to come back. He's met another woman, and pardon me, folks, I'm in a house with a doorbell. And he's met another woman, and he now has a mother who can help raise Catherine. So Catherine comes back to her family's home at Clermont. Her stepmother's name is Emily Evans, and from everything we can tell, Emily Evans raised Catherine like her own daughter and loved her very much. Now, around this time, some tragedy hits Catherine's extended family. Her father's sister passes away, and right around the same time, the sister's husband and daughter pass away, leaving behind one little boy named Clement. And so John Henry adopts Clement. So John Henry and Emily Evans are raising Catherine and Clement together as brother and sister, and they have this lovely little mixed family. And they're very happy together for years, until one year, Emily Evans gets sick, and she passes away very suddenly. Catherine's an older teenager at this point. And then not long after that, Clement dies at college. It's very, very sad, and John Henry and Catherine don't really know what to do. So instead of sitting around Clermont, they decide that they're going to pack up and they're going to travel around the world. So as around 18 or 19 years old, Catherine and her father pack up. They go west to San Francisco. They get on a steamer. They head to Japan, and from Japan they travel all the way around the world. They go through Asia, the Middle East, all through Europe, and it ends 3 years later when Catherine is presented to Queen Victoria. And this photo here on the side is a picture, is the picture taken of Catherine right before she was presented to the Queen. So Catherine and her father come back to Clermont after being away for 3 years, and Catherine Catherine debuts into New York society, and she meets her future husband and gets married in Tivoli, and they have the reception here at Clermont. And they have 2 kids together at first, and they're living in Red Hook, just down the road. But then Catherine's dad starts courting Alice, who we met on the other slide, who's only a year older than Catherine. Now, Catherine and Alice definitely knew of each other growing up. We know that Catherine was friends with Alice's sisters, but not specifically Alice. But either way, it's kind of weird. It wasn't uncommon at the time, especially for, a widower to, marry a younger woman. But it was a little weird. And part of this is the reason why Catherine and her husband actually pack up and move to England. Catherine loved England. She loved the culture. She took on a British accent, and she has more children in England, and eventually buys a castle for herself and starts to redo it for fun. Now, Catherine and her father were not on good terms after he married Alice. However, years later, when John Henry and Alice bring their 2 little girls, Janet and Honoria, to England, they all meet. Catherine's happy to meet her sisters. And we do know that Catherine's children had some sort of a written relationship, letters back and forth, with some of Catherine's children. But we're very lucky to know this story. For a long time, we didn't know very much at all about Catherine. It wasn't until a few years ago that one of Catherine's descendants from England actually came here with a bunch of stuff that had been in storage. Photos, letters, all sorts of lovely things. And with that help and the help of the family, we've been able to put together Catherine's story on a larger scale. And ultimately, when we present these dolls to kids and when we present the stories of the Livingstons to kids, Catherine's story is a huge favorite because her life is very interesting. Now, we're moving forward into the 20th century. We are now meeting the first of the last 2 Livingston girls to grow up at Clermont. Excuse me. This is Honoria Alice Livingston McVitie. She's the elder Livingston sister who loved poetry and nature. Honoria is Alice's oldest daughter. She's born in 1909, and she was really sort of cut out to be a lady of wealth and a lady of culture. She took to high society like a duck takes to water. She loved learning languages and learning about arts and the histories of different countries, and she was set up to grow up to be a lady of the house. Of course, times were changing by the time Honoria became an adult, but either way, she really grew up with this love of all of the things that her mother loved. Now, we can't talk about Honoria without talking about her sister Janet. Janet is just a year younger than Honoria, and she's really a modern lady through and through. Amongst her many accomplishments as an adult, she goes to college, she works on Wall Street, she gets her pilot's license. People who knew her have told me she threw crazy parties in New York and at Clermont. She had tons of friends, and she was always very, very active. But in spite of how different Janet and Honoria may seem, they were basically raised like twins because they were so close in age, and they loved each other very much. Whenever we talk about one, we always talk about the other, kind of like 2 sides of a coin. And their mother, Alice, loved them so much. She talks about all of the fun things they did as children, and she really celebrated their differences. Now, these girls are wearing very cute, typical yet different early 20s dresses. Honoria is wearing a sailor dress, which were super popular for both children and adults at the time. And Janet's wearing more of the cute, almost flapper style dresses with the low waistband. This picture of Honoria is Honoria as an adult. When you look at pictures of Janet and Honoria as children, it's hard to tell them apart unless you know their facial structure because they're dressed identically and they're often the same height no matter what age they are. But this photo is Honoria as an adult at a costume party. It's quite striking, and it's a favorite photo when we show this to groups of kids. And this picture of Janet is really fun because Janet is doing the thing that lots of people do, whether they're adults or children. If you own a cat, you pick them up and you hold them like a baby. And the cat is giving that face that they give right before they tumble out of your arms and run away across the room. But that cat was Topaz. One of the things that the two Livingston girls really did have in common was their love of pets. They had tons of animals during their lifetime here at Clermont. There were always cats and dogs. When they were young, they both had Pekingese dogs. Honoria grows up to have pugs and cats. Janet grows up to have... And that's the end of this part of the presentation. So folks, thank you for joining us for the second part of the American Girls of Clermont. This is part 2. There will be a part 3 of this series. I'm very excited to say that this is an ongoing project. We are continuing to design more American Girls of Clermont, but not just girls. We're actually working on a series of boy dolls to represent different young men who actually lived at this property. In fact, one of the coolest distinctions that we've come up with recently is that the very last little kid to grow up here at Clermont was the son of the last butler, one of the last butlers here, Clarence Jones. His son, also named Clarence, would have been 10 years old in the mid-1930s and was technically the last kid to grow up here at Clermont. So we're very excited to represent him, as well as John Henry, who would have been 10 years old around 1858, and also, pardon me, I'm losing my voice, folks, and also Edward Livingston, who was a little boy, who was 10 years old right about the time that the American Revolution starts. He's actually just 13 years old when the British come up the river and burn his house to the ground. So, very exciting stories. We are also working on a doll to represent the Stockbridge Munsee tribe, which was another tribe of Native American people who lived here on the property. About 120-ish years after the Mohican girl from our first presentation lived here. And we're still looking for more people to represent. So, thank you all for coming today. I'll be going to the comment section here in a moment to answer any questions you might have or listen to any feedback. Also, I mentioned this at the beginning, but we are planning a American Girls of Clermont event where we talk more about the technical side of the doll designs and the costumes and things like that. We'll be working with our lovely, incredibly talented seamstress, Adrienne Westmore, for that, and I'm very excited to get that going, nailed down, etc. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're staying warm on this very, very chilly afternoon. And I'll be back tomorrow to talk to you about Honoria Livingston and listen to some recordings of her interviews about Clermont in the 1980s. Thank you all, and have a lovely day.